6 weeks after the morning he would spend the rest of his life trying to forget, Sergeant Brock Hensley stood alone at the empty range in the last of the light, his cover in his hand, reading a name he had walked past 1,000 times and never once read. The wind came off the water the way it always did at dusk, cool and steady and full of salt, and it moved the flags on the line behind him with a sound like slow breathing. The plaque was small. It was bolted to the base of the tower at eye height, brass gone dark at the edges, and the letters on it were plain, and he had stopped in front of it every working day for 2 years without seeing a single one of them. He saw them now. He read the name and the date and the distance, and he stood there long enough that the light went from gold to gray to nothing, and the targets down the 800 meters of range went from pale shapes against the sand to no shapes at all. A man could stand a long time at a plaque he had finally learned how to read. Took you 6 weeks to read a name that was over your head the whole time. Emmett Cade stood in the tower doorway, an old man with a range master's patience, watching the young sergeant the way he had watched him for 2 years, only tired of it now. She stood right where you're standing. You looked at her, and you saw a tourist. You want to know the part that ought to keep you up nights? So did I, for about 90 seconds. Difference is, I looked twice. Hensley did not answer. There was nothing to say that the plaque had not already said better, and he had learned in 6 weeks that a man who has nothing to say is often wisest to say it. 6 weeks earlier, the same range had been gold with a cold marine dawn, and the wind had been coming off the water then too, and the morning had belonged, or had seemed to belong, entirely to Sergeant Brock Hensley. You even qualify, sweetheart. His voice carried down the firing line, pitched for the 12 trainees filing onto it behind him, and every one of them turned to look. This is a live range, not a petting zoo. You want the tour? It's back at the visitor center. Somebody's grandmother wanders down here every couple of months looking for the gift shop. The woman he was talking to stood near the ready benches at the head of the line, a little apart from everyone, in a plain blue jacket zipped against the wind. She was somewhere in her 30s, unremarkable in the way that let a person disappear in a crowd. Brown hair pulled back plain, no jewelry, no makeup, nothing that asked to be looked at. She was holding a paper cup of coffee in 2 hands, and she did not answer him, and she did not move. The trainees laughed, because he wanted them to, and because he was the one holding the clipboard. And the laugh rolled down the line and out over the empty targets and came back thin off the berm, the way laughter does on a range, with all the warmth stripped out of it by the distance. She set the coffee cup on the corner of a bench. She looked down range. The range ran 800 meters to a line of steel and paper set against a berm of pale sand, and the whole length of it was strung with small red range flags that told the wind to anyone who knew how to read them, and most people did not. Most people saw a row of flags and thought the wind was blowing. The woman read them the way a person reads a room they have lived in for years, her eyes moving once across the near flags and the far flags and the little tuft of dry grass at the 200, and settling. And she stood so still after that. The stillness itself became the first thing worth noticing about her, if anyone had been looking. Behind the tower glass, Emmett Cade was looking. He had run this range for 11 years and shot on it, and a dozen others for 30 years before that. And he had learned a thing that the loud men never learned, which was that the loudest man on any line is rarely the most dangerous one, and that the person to watch is almost always the one who has gone quiet. He watched the woman in the blue jacket go quiet, and he set down the mug he was holding, and he did not know yet what he was seeing, only that he had seen it before, a long time ago, in men who came back from places they would not name and stood at the edge of things, watching the way she was watching now. Hensley had already turned back to his trainees, satisfied, the tourist forgotten, the morning his again. He was a good enough shooter and a worse enough teacher, a man who had confused being loud with being sure, and he had a way of running a relay that was mostly performance, a running commentary aimed less at the 12 young Marines on the line than at the idea of an audience that a certain kind of man carries around with him everywhere he goes. He did not notice that the woman had not left. He did not notice that she had lifted her eyes to the far target line and read the wind before a single round had been fired, her lips moving once around a number, and that the old man in the tower had seen her do it and gone very still himself, the way a hunter goes still when the woods change. Hensley had come up the way a lot of loud men come up, on genuine talent that had never once been tested by anything worse than a bad day. He was a good pistol shot and a better rifle shot, and he had won a base match or two, and somewhere along the way he had decided that the winning was the whole of it, that a man who could put rounds in a black circle in fair weather had learned everything the work had to teach. He had never lain in a scrape for 11 hours. He had never called a wind that had a life riding on the answer. He had never once been made small by the world, and so he had never learned the humility that only the world can teach. And a man who has not been humbled by anything larger than himself will, sooner or later, go looking for something smaller than himself to stand on. That morning, in a plain blue jacket, that something had walked onto his range and set down a paper cup of coffee and refused to be small. The relay settled onto the line, and the range went hot, and the first shots cracked out into the cold, flat and hard, and the smell of powder came back on the wind. They shot poorly. The wind that morning was a switching wind, a coastal wind that came full off the water and then swung and softened and came again, and it was the kind of wind that punished a shooter who set a hold and trusted it. And the trainees set holds and trusted them and watched their rounds walk off into the sand and could not understand why. Hensley moved behind them barking corrections, and the corrections were the corrections a man gives when he has memorized the words and never learned the thing underneath them. "Hold left! Hold left! You're letting it push you!" Hensley called, and the wind quit while he was saying it, dropped out entirely the way that wind does, and the next round the trainee sent went wide left of the target because the shooter had held for a wind that was no longer there to hold for. Hensley cursed the trainee's fundamentals, which was easier than cursing his own eye. He's holding for a wind that stopped 30 seconds ago. The woman said it quietly, to no one, her eyes on the flags, almost to herself, the way a person comments on the weather. Full value off the water, but it's dropping. He's got a click and a half of hold on a quarter value breeze, and it'll swing again before he's done, out of the north this time, and when it does, he'll chase it the wrong way. She had not raised her voice. She had not meant it for anyone. But Cade had come out of the tower onto the line, drawn by something he could not have named, and he was standing near enough to hear, and he heard every word of it, and the words were the words of somebody who had called wind for a living, in conditions a great deal less forgiving than a peacetime dawn. "You've done this," Cade said, "a while ago." The woman did not look at him. On the bench beside her, a spotting scope sat knocked askew on its little tripod, left there by whoever had set up the line, and without seeming to decide to, she reached over and squared it, and put her eye to it, and focused it in a single unbroken motion, the way a person does a thing their hands have done 10,000 times, a thing that has stopped being a skill and become a reflex, and she read the last trainee's impact before the tower called it. "Low left," she said. "Edge of the black, about 8 o'clock. He'll chase it if nobody tells him not to, and the wind'll make a liar out of him for it." A second later, the tower speaker crackled and called the same impact, "Low left," and Cade looked at her for a long moment and did not say anything at all, because there was nothing to say that would not have sounded foolish out loud. She was not guessing. She had called the shot before the glass did, and she had done it the way the best of them did it, without heat, without any need to be seen doing it, as if the answer had simply been sitting there in the air in front of her, waiting for someone to read it aloud. "You called it before the glass did," Cade said, keeping his voice low, keeping it between the two of them. "That's not eyes. Anybody can have good eyes. That's a thing you learn over years, and then it stops being a thing you do, and starts being a thing you are." He waited, the way an old man waits when he already half knows the answer. She did not give him one. She only reached out and adjusted the spotting scope a degree, tracking the next trainee's rifle as it came up, reading the mirage boiling off the sand between the two of them and the far berm, the heat shimmer that told the whole story of the air to anyone who had spent a life learning its language. "Miller light to heavy right about now," she murmured, more to the mirage than to him, boiling straight up at the fore. Wind's about to lie to them again. And it did. Cade set his clipboard down on the bench. A woman, a Marine sergeant, had called a petting zoo tourist 90 seconds ago, had just outcalled his tower, calm as a woman reading a grocery list, and the old range master found that he wanted, more than he had wanted anything in a good while, to know her name. He had spent 30 years around shooters. He knew the difference between a person who had done a thing and a person who had done the thing until it lived in their hands, and he was standing next to the second kind, and the second kind did not wander down to the KD range by accident. But Hensley wanted the room back, and Hensley had noticed that his trainees were sneaking looks at the quiet woman by the benches instead of at him, and there was only one thing he knew to do when a room drifted, and it was to make somebody small so that he could feel large by comparison. "Hey." He walked the line toward her, grinning for the crowd, the clipboard swinging in his hand. "You want a turn, sweetheart? Bench is open. Big day for you. You can tell the ladies at the senior center you shot on a real Marine range." She looked at him and said nothing, which was worse than anything she could have said, because silence gave him nothing to hit, and he felt the nothing and did not understand it, and pushed harder to cover the not understanding. "Go on." He unslung his own rifle, and this time he held it out to her across both palms, mock gallant, playing the gentleman for the 12 young Marines who would tell this story in the barracks that night. "Show us. I'll even hold your hand." The relay roared. It was the kind of line that got a laugh every time a man like Hensley said it, and it got one now, big and easy, and he stood in the middle of it warm and certain, and briefly, gloriously himself. The woman looked at the rifle. She looked at him. When she spoke, it was 2 words, flat and unbothered, and they cut the laugh clean in half. "You first." Somebody in the relay made a sound that they turned quickly into a cough. Down at the far end of the line, a young lance corporal named Frey, 19 years old, and knew enough to still believe the things they had promised him about honor, did not laugh at all, and looked at the woman with something that was almost recognition, as if she reminded him of somebody, though he could not have said who. Hensley's grin held, but it held the way a man holds a grin when it has stopped being easy, when the muscles are doing the work the feeling used to do, and he pulled the rifle back and slung it and reached for the only tool he had left, which was to name her, because if he could name her, he could shrink her. "All right, Annie Oakley," he said. "You just watch then. Watch the professionals work." He said the word professionals to the trainees and jerked his thumb back at her without looking. "We got ourselves a tourist on the line, gents. Everybody wave to the tourist." A couple of them waved, uncertain now, the joke gone a half step past the place where it was funny and into the place where it was only mean, and the 2 who waved put their hands down quickly, the way you do when you have laughed at something and then heard how it sounded. Frey did not wave, and he did not laugh, and he kept sneaking looks at the woman by the benches because there was something about the way she was standing that he half recognized from home, His grandfather had stood like that, an old man who never talked about Korea and never went to the reunions and kept a single small box on a high shelf that the family was not to open, and who had once, exactly once, when Frey was small and had asked him what the box was, gone as still as this woman was standing now, still in a way that had a whole country in it. Frey did not know what he was looking at on the range that morning, but some part of him, the part that had loved that silent old man, knew it was not a tourist, and knew that the sergeant was walking out onto ice that only sounded solid. Cade caught Hensley's eye across the line and gave him a small, plain shake of the head. "Enough, son. Leave it be." And Hensley saw it, and waved it off with a little roll of his shoulders, and turned back to his relay, unwilling to give up the last of the crowd's warmth. And the woman in the blue jacket just watched him. Patient, unhurried, the way a range flag watches the wind, reading him the way she had read the far target line, taking the whole measure of him and giving him nothing at all to push against. If you have ever stood in a room and watched the loud, forget that quiet is not the same thing as weak. Stay with this one, and subscribe to the Veteran Vault, because the next few minutes are going to teach a young man something the whole Marine Corps could not teach him in 6 years. The joke should have died there. A better man would have let it die. But Hensley had built the entire morning on being the biggest thing on the line, and the tourist by the benches would not get small, no matter how hard he leaned on her. And there is nothing a certain kind of man fears more than a person he cannot make flinch. So he did the thing that men like him do when the mockery stops working and the fear starts showing. He decided she had to go. "All right, that's enough sightseeing." He came back down the line toward her, and his voice had lost the grin now, and found the flat official edge a man reaches for when he wants to sound like the rules are on his side instead of his pride. "Line's closed to spectators, ma'am. Safety reasons. You need to clear off. Now." She did not argue with him. That was the thing that would stay with the trainees afterward, the ones honest enough to remember it clearly. She did not argue, and she did not explain, and she did not tell him who she was, and she did not reach into a pocket for anything that would have ended it in a sentence. She simply did not leave. She stood where she was standing, still holding the morning in that same unhurried stillness, and she let him come, the way you let weather come when there is no use in running from it. I said clear off. He took her by the upper arm. The moment his hand closed on her arm, she went still in a way that was different from before. Not the stillness of a person standing quietly, but the stillness of a thing that has decided, for now, not to move. And the difference between those two stillnesses was the entire story, and only 2 people on that range could read it. One of them was Emmett Cade. The other was the man holding her arm, and he could feel it under his hand, without understanding it. A stillness with a floor under it. A stillness that did not flinch, and did not pull, and did not give him the resistance he needed to feel large. A stillness that made the hair stand up on the back of his neck, for reasons his mouth was too proud to admit. "You'll want to take your hand off me, Sergeant." She said it quietly, without threat, the way a person warns you about a step you are about to miss in the dark. It was not a challenge. It was a courtesy, extended one time. And her free hand, down at her side where he could not see it, and where Cade could, settled for 1/2 second into a shape. Thumb and finger closing on nothing. The exact grip of a support hand under a rifle's forend. Muscle memory older and deeper than the man touching her. A hand remembering a thing the woman herself had not asked it to remember. Cade saw it, and felt something go cold and certain and a little bit reverent in his chest, the way an old churchgoer feels when a hymn he had forgotten starts up. Near the end of the line, the young trainee, Frey, started to say something. He got as far as opening his mouth and drawing the breath for it. Then he looked at the sergeant's face, at the thing that had come into it, and he lost his nerve and looked at his boots instead. and up and down the line. 11 other young Marines found something suddenly fascinating about their own boots, too, and the woman stood alone in the middle of all of them, with a stranger's hand on her arm and no one willing to be the one who spoke. Her voice never rose, but Hensley's hand came off her arm on its own, his fingers opening as if the arm had grown too hot to hold, and he stepped back half a pace, and for the length of one full breath he did not know why he had let go, only that some part of him older than his pride had made the decision for him and had made it fast. That was when Emmett Cade decided he had watched enough. The old range master crossed the line, slow and deliberate, the way a man crosses ground he owns, and put himself between the sergeant and the woman, and he looked at Hensley with 11 years of authority over this range and 30 more of hard-earned rank behind it. "Son," Cade said, and his voice was quiet. And quiet, from Cade, was a thing the trainees had already learned to listen for. "You have no idea who that is. I'm going to give you one chance to be smarter than you've been all morning, and I'd take it if I were you." Hensley's pride was the only thing he had left to stand on, and he stood on it because it was all he had ever really stood on. "I know she's not cleared to be on my line, Gunny. That's all I need to know. Respectfully." Cade looked at him for a moment longer, and there was something almost like pity in it. Then he did something that Hensley would replay for weeks afterward and understand a little more each time he replayed it. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice or pull rank or list a single one of the things he knew. He simply turned his head and looked at the small, dark plaque bolted to the base of the tower, held his eyes on it a moment, and then looked back at the woman in the blue jacket, and then he walked away from Hensley without another word, back toward the tower, and picked up the phone. He spoke into it low and fast, a man who had decided something and meant to see it through. He did not describe her by her face, because her face would have meant nothing to the person on the other end of the line. He described her by her shooting, which was the only language that would carry the weight. "I've got a shooter on my range," Cade said into the phone, one hand cupped around the mouthpiece. "Called my tower before my tower called itself. Read a switch nobody on this line felt coming. Support hand's got a ghost in it. She picked up a scope and squared a call cold." A pause while the other end said something. "No, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being careful. Is the sergeant major on the base today? Get him down to the KD range and tell him to hurry, before my instructor does something none of us can walk back." He hung up. Out on the line, the woman had finally given her whole attention to the far targets, standing easy, reading the 800 meters of switching wind as though it were a letter that had been written to her personally and left unopened for years. And the audience understood before anyone else on that range did that the danger in the morning had quietly, completely, and irreversibly reversed. What the boy in the pressed uniform did not know was exactly what the next few minutes were about to teach him, and the old man had just made a phone call to make sure the whole line learned it at the same time. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault so you do not miss the moment it lands. 14 years before that cold marine dawn on the far side of the world, the wind had been a hot wind that carried grit and the smell of diesel and old stone, and the woman in the blue jacket had been a corporal of 22 lying flat in a shallow scrape on a dry Helmand ridge, with her eye against a scope, and a man she loved like a brother lying beside her, calling the world into her ear, one steady word at a time. They had been in the hide since before first light, Corporal Nora Ballard and her spotter, Corporal Jesse Krantz, 200 meters up a rock spine above a valley that no map could make sound as dangerous as it truly was. They had walked in under the dark and dug in and gone invisible, the way they had learned to go invisible, and now they lay in the growing heat and watched. Below them, a patrol of Marines moved along a low mud wall toward a cluster of compounds, slow and careful and entirely unaware. 31 men strung out in a loose file, and Ballard lay above them with 800 meters of dead air between her rifle and the doorway where she had watched. Twice now. A shadow move that did not move the way a farmer moves. "Talk to me," she said. Her voice barely disturbed the air. "Wind's half value, left to right. Maybe 8. Steady for now," Krantz murmured, his glass on the compound, his voice easy in the way that steadied her. The way a good spotter is a second nervous system you did not have to think about. He had been reading wind for her for 2 tours, in 3 provinces, and she trusted his calls more than she trusted her own eyes. And that trust was a thing they had built 1 shot at a time, until it was load-bearing. They had met at the schoolhouse, 2 kids who could shoot better than they had any right to, and they had figured out inside a week that they were better together than either was alone. The way 2 instruments in tune make a third sound, that is neither of them. He read the world, and she acted on it. And in the years since they had learned each other's silences until words were mostly a formality, he knew she took her coffee scalding and never finished it. She knew he wrote letters home he never mailed and carried a photograph he never showed anyone. On the long nights in the hides, they did not talk much because they did not need to, and the not needing to was the closest thing to family either of them had carried into that country. He called her Cat. She called him nothing at all most of the time, because when you trust a person that completely, their name becomes a thing you only reach for in emergencies. "You've got a clean lane to that near doorway, Cat. Nothing between you and it, but air and patience. Anything moves in that door. It moves at your pleasure." The ambush triggered the way they always did, all at once and from everywhere. The valley coming apart into noise, the air below filling with the flat, vicious cracks of rounds and the deeper cough of something heavier, and the patrol folding down behind the only cover there was, pinned in the open with fire, walking in on them from the compound and from the ridge across the wadi. Ballard heard the patrol's radio man screaming over the net for anything, anyone, air, guns, God. And she found the near doorway again through her scope, and there was a man in it, now, calm as she was, with a long weapon braced on the frame, and he was killing her Marines, 1 careful, patient shot at a time, and she understood in an instant the particular horror of it, that he was good, that he was doing to her people exactly what she had been trained to do to his. 800, Krantz said, and his voice had gone flat and certain, all the ease burned out of it in a breath. "Half value, dropping. Call it a quarter now. You own it. You own it, Cat. Send it." She built the shot the way she had built 10,000 shots before it, the whole roaring world narrowing down to breath and pulse, and the small, bright arithmetic of dope and hold and lead. The noise below going far away, the heat going away, everything going away except the reticle and the doorway, and the slow squeeze that was less a decision than a permission she gave herself. And between one heartbeat and the next, she sent it. And 800 meters away, the man in the doorway went down, and the doorway went empty, and the weight came off the pinned patrol all at once, like a hand lifting off a drowning man's back. It was the shot that was engraved now on a small, dark plaque, bolted to the base of a range tower, half a world and a lifetime away. It was the shot that broke the ambush and bought 31 Marines the seconds they needed to get up off the ground and fight their way out of a valley that had been built, that morning, to keep them in it forever. Over the net, as the patrol pulled back by rushes, the radio man's voice came up cracked and grateful and searching for the overwatch that had saved them, and he called her by the only name he had for the ghost on the ridge. "BLACKCAT," he said. "BLACKCAT. Whoever you are up there. You just bought us the road." The name had been a joke once, a thing a grinning gunnery sergeant had hung on her in sniper school for the way she saw in the dark and moved without sound, and it stopped being a joke in that valley and became the thing the Marine Corps would remember her by, whether or not it remembered her face. And she had earned it in the worst way there was to earn a thing, which is by being the only one who could do it when it had to be done. They came for the hide on the exfil. It was fast and it was ugly, and there is no version of it that is worth telling in detail. And on the way down off the ridge, in the last 100 meters before the low ground, Jesse Krantz was hit. Ballard carried him. She got him up across her shoulders, and she carried him the whole way down the spine and across the wadi, and out to the landing zone with the hot wind on both of them and her legs on fire and his blood on her neck. And she talked to him the whole way, and he answered her for a while, and then he did not, and he did not make it. The last thing he ever did in this world was call a wind for her. Half value, dropping. And she has carried that too, every single day of every year, between that ridge and this range. Quietly, the way the plaque carried her name, in plain sight, and read by no one. She had gone home with a silver star she did not want, and a folded flag she gave to his mother, and a habit of stillness that never fully left her again. There's a kind of grief that does not fade so much as it settles, the way silt settles in still water, until it becomes the floor you stand on. She had learned to stand on it. She had learned to get up in the mornings and drink her coffee scalding and never finish it, and to go about the ordinary business of a life that Jesse Krantz had bought for her at the price of his own. And every year, on the day of the ridge, she went somewhere quiet and let herself feel the whole weight of it for one day before folding it back up and carrying it another year. This year, the quiet place she had chosen was the range where her shot was written down, because she had not been back in a long time, and because she wanted to stand once more on the ground where the Marine Corps had decided to remember the shot and forget the cost. 14 years later, a Marine on a peaceful range in the cold had looked at that same shooter and called her somebody's grandmother looking for the gift shop, and had put his hand on the arm that carried Jesse Krantz down off a mountain. And the audience was the only soul on that range who knew what the woman in the blue jacket was being asked to hold still through, and how much it was costing her, in a currency none of them could see, to keep on holding. Back on the line, Hensley could not let it go, because letting it go meant admitting the morning had gotten away from him, and admitting that was a thing his whole self was built to prevent. And so he reached for the biggest thing he had left. "You know what, tourist? Prove it." He unslung his rifle again, and this time he wasn't offering it. He was daring her with it, pushing it into her hands so that the trainees could watch her fumble it and drop it, and the morning could end the way he needed it to end, with her small and him large, and the natural order of his world restored. "You want to stand on my line and correct my calls, and outstare me in front of my Marines. You shoot cold, right now. 1 round, or you admit you're a fraud, and you walk. Those are the options. There's no third one. Prove it or walk." She took the rifle, because he shoved it into her hands, and there was nowhere for it to go but into them. And for 3 seconds, she held it. And those 3 seconds were the loudest thing that had happened on that range all morning to the handful of people who could hear what they were saying. Her hands found the rifle the way the tide finds the shore, without hurry and without doubt. Support hand sliding under the forend, exactly where the ghost had been, exactly where 14 years of a life had put it. Firing hand closing on the grip. Cheek settling to the stock in a check weld so natural it looked like a woman lying down to rest, her elbow finding its place, her breath going long and low without her thinking about it at all, her whole body folding down around the weapon into the shape of a thing that had spent a decade learning that exact shape and had never once forgotten it. Cade saw it. Frey saw it. Every trainee on that line who had any eye in his head at all saw a woman hold a rifle the way not one of them could hold it yet, might never hold it, and the joke died quietly in 12 young throats at once. Then she lowered it. She took her cheek off the stock and brought the muzzle down and made it safe with 2 economical movements, and held the rifle out to him, flat across her palms, the same way he had offered it to her, and the echo of that was not lost on anyone. "I've got nothing to prove to you," she said. It was the mercy in it that enraged him. She had shown him in 3 silent seconds, in front of every man he was trying to impress, exactly what she was and exactly what he was not. And then she had declined to finish him with it, had handed the rifle back instead of raising it. And a small man cannot bear to be spared, because being spared means someone had the power to ruin him and chose not to use it. And that is a debt a small man does not know how to carry. He snatched the rifle back, and because he had nothing else and no words left, he shoved her, a short, hard shove to the shoulder that rocked her back a full step, the kind of shove a man gives when he has already lost the argument and needs his body to say the thing his mouth cannot. She absorbed it. She rooted and took the step and did not fall, and did not so much as lift a hand, and for one instant, one single naked instant, her eyes went flat and level and operational. The eyes that had looked through 800 meters of Helmand air and made a decision about a man in a doorway, and every animal part of the Marine standing near her felt the temperature of the whole morning drop 10 degrees. And then, by choice, plainly and visibly by choice, she let it go. The flatness softened out of her eyes. She let the moment pass through her and out the other side. She chose, the way she had been choosing quietly all morning, all her life, not to become the thing the day was daring her to become. The shove landed, and the relay froze, and behind them, at the gate at the head of the range road, a Marine in a service uniform with the broad chevrons and rockers of a sergeant major on his sleeves had stopped walking and was standing very still in the gold light, looking at the woman in the blue jacket. Sergeant Major Marcus Beckwith crossed the range at a pace that made the trainees straighten without being told to, a pace with 51 years and 32 of them in the corps behind it. And he did not look at Hensley, did not so much as register that the sergeant existed, walked past him as if he were one of the benches, and stopped in front of the woman in the blue jacket and came to a halt with the particular precision of a man who has just found something he had spent a long time not letting himself hope to find. "Staff Sergeant Ballard," he said. The whole line went silent. It was a different silence than the mocking one from the start of the morning. It was the silence of 12 young Marines realizing all at once and far too late that they had misread every single thing about the last hour of their lives. "BLACKCAT," Beckwith said the call sign quietly, the way a man says a word he has carried a long way and set down carefully. "I read your after action 100 times before I ever taught a hold. Every scout sniper I have put through a schoolhouse in 15 years has heard about the ridge in Helmand, whether they ever learned your name or not. Some of them are alive because of the man you saved that day, and their kids are alive, and they will never know your name, and that is the price of the work you did." He turned his head then, slow, and he looked at Sergeant Brock Hensley for the first time, and then he lifted one hand and pointed at the small, dark plaque bolted to the base of the tower, the plaque Hensley had walked past 1,000 mornings. "That plaque, Sergeant, that's her shot. 800 meters, Helmand, 2012. The range record you teach children to dream about hitting one day. It's hers. You have been standing under her name all morning long, and you called her a tourist." Hensley looked at the plaque. He looked at the name cut into the dark brass. He looked at the woman in the blue jacket. And his face did the thing that faces do when the ground goes out from under a man in stages, one after another, with no mercy in the pacing of it. First confusion, A searching, blinking look, as if he had simply misheard the sergeant major and needed the words repeated. Then disbelief, a small, hard shake of the head against a thing that couldn't be so. Then recognition, the awful slow arrival of understanding as the name on the plaque and the woman in front of him and those 3 seconds of her hands on his rifle all came together into a single fact he could not put back into the box he had taken it out of. And finally, horror, plain and total and quiet, as he understood completely what he had done, and to whom, and how many witnesses had stood on that line and watched him do it. Down the length of the range, the trainees came to attention, first raggedly, and then all at once, and sharp. Cade was already standing at it, had been since the moment he set down the phone. Through all of it, the woman had not moved. She had stood in the same unhurried stillness, through the mockery and the grab and the dare and the shove, and now the reveal. The stillness that was the truest and oldest thing about her. And now she inclined her head a half-inch toward the sergeant major, no more than that. And when she spoke, it was quiet and even and entirely, completely without triumph. "Good morning, Sergeant Major." The whole line stood at attention for a woman a sergeant had called somebody's grandmother 90 minutes before, and the only person still moving on that range was Brock Hensley, who turned his head one way and then the other, looking for something, anything, and could not find a single place in the whole wide world to put his eyes. The reckoning, when it came, was fast and institutional and had nothing of cruelty in it, which somehow made it heavier to watch than any shouting would have been. Beckwith relieved Hensley on the spot, quietly, in the flat administrative language that carries more finality than a raised voice ever could, and told him to report to his own chain of command. And by the time the sun was full, up over the water, there were phone calls being made in offices across the base, and a young career had bent in a direction it would not fully straighten out again. It wasn't vengeance. Not one word of it was vengeance. It was the institution doing the thing the institution exists to do when one of its own forgets what the uniform is actually for. And it would have been easy for Nora Ballard to stand back and let it run, to let the machine grind the boy down to nothing, to earn a full measure of the ordinary satisfaction that a person is owed after a morning like that one. She did not take it. She found Beckwith at the tower a few minutes later, out of the trainees' hearing, and she asked him quietly to go easy on the boy. "He's just a boy who hasn't been shot at yet," she said, and she was looking out at the 12 young Marines standing chastened on the line, not at Beckwith. "He doesn't know what the quiet ones cost. None of them do, until the day they do, and then it's the only thing they know. Don't take his whole life for one bad morning. Teach him instead. Breaking him doesn't bring anybody back, and God knows, I've already tried breaking things to bring people back. If you have ever watched grace look a great deal more like strength than like mercy, sit with this one a moment and subscribe to the veteran vault, so the quiet ones get remembered while they are still here, to see themselves remembered." She asked for the line for 1 minute. They gave it to her without a word. All of them. Beckwith and Cade and the 12 trainees, the way a congregation gives a moment when it recognizes one. She walked to the bench, and Cade brought her a rifle without being asked, the good one, the one he kept for people who had earned it, and she settled down behind it and built a single shot the way she had built the one on the ridge 14 years before. The whole range gone silent and still around her, the flags telling her the wind, for once, telling her the truth. And she sent one round the length of 800 meters into the center of the far steel, and the flat, clean clang of it came back thin and true across the sand a full second later. She stayed a moment behind the rifle, her cheek still on the stock. "That one's yours, Jesse," she said, so quietly that only Cade, standing near, heard the name at all. And Cade took his cover off his gray head and held it against his chest and said nothing, because some things an old range master knows to let pass in silence, and honor is one of them. Beckwith stood at attention the whole minute, and the 12 trainees stood at attention behind him, and not one of them would ever again look at a quiet person on a firing line, the same careless way they had looked at her that morning, and that, more than the plaque, more than the record, was the thing she left on that range. 6 weeks later, at dusk, Sergeant Brock Hensley stood alone at the empty range reading the name on the plaque, and Emmett Cade watched him from the tower doorway, and on the bench beside the young sergeant lay a letter that had come to him through the schoolhouse a few days before. It was short. It did not scold him. It told him, in 4 plain sentences, that the offer stood if he wanted it, that a certain retired staff sergeant ran a 2-day marksmanship clinic twice a year for instructors humble enough to admit they still had things left to learn, and that there was a place in the next one with his name on it, if he had the humility to take the place, and that no one there would ever mention this morning again. It was signed with a name, and under the name, in parentheses, a single word, the word that had frozen the firing line, and Brock Hensley ran his thumb slowly over the ink of that word for a long time in the failing light. He had learned, in the 6 weeks between the morning and the dusk, most of the things a man learns after a fall like his. He had learned that the story travels faster than a man can walk away from it, and that the version that travels is never kind, and that the kindest person in the whole story turned out to be the woman he had put his hand on. He had learned her name properly, and read her citation, and found in it the name of a corporal named Jesse Krantz, and had understood, sitting alone in his quarters one night, exactly whose arm he had grabbed and exactly what that arm had carried. He had driven himself, one gray afternoon, out to the base cemetery, though Krantz was not buried there, and had stood among the white stones, a while trying to feel his way toward the size of the thing, and had come away knowing only that it was larger than he was, and that this was the first true thing he had understood in a long time. He would take the place. He would drive the 6 hours to the clinic, and he would stand on a strange range and be a student again. And he would spend the rest of his career trying quietly to be worth reading that name aloud. And he would teach every trainee who ever came under him the one thing that morning had taught him, which was to watch the quiet one on the line, always without fail, because the quiet one is the one who has already paid for the silence, and paid in a coin you cannot see. The wind came off the water, the way it always did at dusk, cool and steady and full of salt, and it moved the flags on the line with a sound like slow breathing, and the small dark plaque held the name in plain sight, the way it always had, patient as the woman herself, waiting to be read by whoever, at last, finally learned how to look. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.